Hey, leaders, I want to talk about what burnout truly is. And I want it to be something that will help you identify whether you have experienced it or are experiencing it. I would encourage a lot of new leaders before they step into an executive role, whether they're about to become a church planter, take on an executive level position in a nonprofit, corporate company. It's so important to take part in some sort of retreats that'll help reframe and position you for endurance because leadership is not an easy journey. And I'll just jump right into this theme on what is burnout. Leadership is a very difficult journey. There's high visibility, high, stakes decision making. You're leading teams in different, sizes and variations. Sometimes they're interdisciplinary, which means that you're sort of managing different teams that carry different types of expertise, and you're trying to sort of be the bridge to create unity and harmony to accomplish the organization's goals. I mean, that's a lot of juggling. And so you run into this thing called burnout. And what burnout looks like, it looks like irritability. It looks like very little patience, very little grace. It looks like finding yourself in a place where you prefer to isolate instead of being in relationship. You experience a lot of anger and even resentment towards someone who you feel doesn't understand you. Another thing that I've personally experienced in this idea of burnout is that I lose sort of a sense of vision and and scope of what I'm about to do. I end up losing a sense of direction. And so the consistent theme here can be captured in one word, and it's fatigue. Burnout essentially means that you're fatigued. And so in different sort of contexts, it can be described as stress. It can be described as plateau. It can be described as, sort of feeling foggy and, having a sense of confusion and disorientation. But all of that really means is there's a great need for rest. Now, what is burnout? Burnout is fatigue. And how do you overcome burnout? And it looks like resting. And perhaps in the next video, I'll talk about how to discover, what your preferred method of rest looks like. But essentially, you need to access rest of not just physical body, but rest of soul and spirit. Soul, the mind, the will, and the emotion. So it's all there. It's your mind, your cognition, your sort of constantly ruminating and thinking and brainstorming, strategizing. That needs to sort of digress. And then your will, all these desires, ambitions, right? That needs to sort of come into a state of calmness. And then your emotions, constantly engaging with circumstances and situations around you, like a soundboard, and you find yourself feeling overstimulated. And then your spirit. Your spirit is created by God for the purposes of relationship. We cannot relate to God without a spirit, for God is spirit. And so when we experience fatigue and stress, we no longer become relational. We're no longer effective. And then it begins to tax our bodies. And so you want to find out, how do you access physical rest, then soul specific rest? Rest for your mind, rest for your soul, and then rest for your spirit, where you can experience this spiritual renewal in the presence of the Lord that can rekindle intimacy with God. Now, here's the thing: pastors, faith-based leaders, ministers, we're not exempt from experiencing burnout. We're not. Just because we're in ministry or in a faith-based vocation doesn't mean that we can't experience it. Excuse me, doesn't mean that we can't we can't experience burnout. We think that just because we're in ministry, it means that we're sort of, in relationship with God and we're in God's will. And so we're not going to experience burnout, but that's not exactly the case because burnout is the byproduct of idolatry. Let me explain. Burnout is when we take sort of the seat, the royal throne of where God belongs, and we take seat in that position, and we start to take charge. We start to lead. We start to look at our hands and our abilities to accomplish something that only God can accomplish. In this relationship with God, He is inviting us into a partnership, a covenant based partnership. He's not asking us to be doers only, as if He was a master or a task maker and He just wants you to go, do, and earn your way perhaps into the kingdom. Not at all. He wants a relationship, and a relationship demands time in that chair right there. It demands time to be alone with God, to find His presence, to have a return of affection for Him. All of that stuff starts to sort of, fade away. And your heart, which is the garden of intimacy where you meet with God, that place becomes calloused and tired. And so there's such a need to retreat. This word in Psalm 91:1, it says, he who dwells in the secret place shall abide. And that word, you know, dwelling and even dwelling and abiding have this beautiful, beautiful connotation. But specifically with the word dwell, it takes you into this understanding in Hebrew that it wants us to the passage is inviting us into retiring, to retire. So when you dwell and when you abide, you're retiring. And to retire means to choose no other place and choose nothing else but to retire, to sort of lean back and linger and just lay there. When we live that sort of lifestyle, we enter beneath the shelter of the Most High. And so Psalm 91:1, the whole chapter on protection and God's sort of edge and covering, can't really be experienced without us living a lifestyle of retiring in God's presence. Because that word dwell and abide in that first verse teaches us that that is sort of the gateway into accessing God's divine protection. There was a time where, in the midst of a lot of transition and change during COVID, and I think COVID was the moment where our nation experienced one of the most highest levels, I mean, breaking data of mental illness. And many people were going into, different programs and therapy, but even into hospitals, and there weren't enough hospital beds. And it wasn't because it was some sort of hemorrhagic bleed, where someone's, body was impaled. It wasn't any of that. Majority of the patients going into the emergency department during COVID were mental health related emergencies. And it was during that period where I personally realized that I was seated in the throne of my heart. Because in the midst of uncertainty and transition, I wanted to take the reins and be in control. And in that period, I did not know how to be in control. I lost control. And that sent me into this state of confusion and not knowing what to do. And so during that period of time, 2019, I immediately just shifted and began to serve the community through my nonprofit, began to provide food and produce, and I just began doing kingdom work. But I experienced burnout. because I began to sort of fill in this gap of uncertainty with productive kingdom activities, but I didn't address the bigger issue, the condition of my heart, that my heart was not in a state of peace and rest, but was in a place of looking for a new sort of sense of direction. And you know something? We're human and we make those mistakes. We end up, getting confused, and doing good things sometimes eclipses what's really happening in our hearts. But what's so beautiful is that God knocks at the door of our heart every day and invites us to be with him right there, to take a few minutes out of your day and say, Lord, here I am. Here I am to be with you, to rediscover your voice, to find your presence. Just want to end with this. Moses, in chapter 33 of Exodus, he says, Lord, I will not go if your presence doesn't go with me. Leaders, this is exactly the cry of our hearts. God, I don't want to go if your presence doesn't go with me. The Israelites, Moses communicated to the nations around them that God was with them because God's presence was with them. And as a leader, those that are around you, those that are beneath your care, I pray that they may know that God is with you because they perceive God's presence on you. Until next time, friends, lead with endurance and lead this race with victory. God bless you.